To share some of the Georgia State University experience. So that today we are considered the #2 most innovative university in the United States. But that is a long journey. It is not something that happened easily, and it is not something that happened quickly. So the slide here is to give you an overview of what I will talk about, which is the story of our journey, as President Sun has asked, to share the experience, the road, the opportunities, the challenges, the successes, but also the difficulties. So the outline here is I will begin by saying a little bit about Georgia State University, so the context of where our university is, our size, our complexity, and then to talk about innovation at Georgia State University. What are some of the results? Why do people consider us innovative? And then go back to the beginning. How did we get to where we are? This bullet point, the state way, that's a hashtag from social media. That's something that we use at Georgia State. That is our hashtag because we have a tendency to do some things differently and in non-traditional ways for higher education. And then finally, I will focus in on some specific examples and some of the changes we've made in the educational practices, as well as in the world of research, the competition of ideas and focus. So let's begin with who is Georgia State University. We are a university of approximately 53,000 students in the city of Atlanta in Georgia. It is a university that, when I started 10 years ago, was 28,000 students. So we have grown tremendously. Not only with our main campus, which is in the heart of our city, in the downtown area of our city, but we also have something that we see many campus sites. But our sites are spread around the perimeter of the city, the outside, as well as the main campus, 35,000 students in Atlanta. The word here under B, terminus, I just want to say a little bit about the history of our city, because to understand the opportunity, sometimes one must also understand and appreciate the history. So Atlanta, Georgia, a coastal city in the southeastern part of the United States, is one of the few U.S. cities that is not on a major waterway. If you look at most major American cities, they are either on major rivers or port cities on the coast. But Atlanta is a place where the railroads met. So in the history and the founding of the city and its growth, it was where different railroads came together, and that's why the name terminus. It's where the railroads terminated, and they met in this place. So it's not, we have a river, but it's a small river. But it is a city of commerce, and that's the reason I make this point. One of the things that's interesting and important for our university is our connection between the university and the economic opportunity of our region. And so the city that was founded where the railroads met is a city of business. There are many what we call Fortune 500 companies headquartered in Atlanta, which would be among the 500 largest companies. Probably the most famous company headquartered in Atlanta is the Coca-Cola company, known the world over, available in just about every country in the world. As a university, Georgia State is what we call a R1 university, or a Research 1 university. These are the universities that, in addition to having a large teaching mission, also have a large research mission. Our faculty are expected to produce original scholarship, to basically create new knowledge and push back the frontiers of knowledge. In the US, one of the ways we measure the success or impact of R1 universities is the amount of money that we actually spend on research. And this is something that our National Science Foundation measures every year. So for the most recent rankings, we're number 108, which is not yet as impressive as we will be, but to recognize in a talk on innovation, only 6 years ago, we were about number 190. So we are one of the fastest rising universities, moving from almost being outside the top 200 to number 108. That's actually based on data 2 years ago. and we expect within the next 5 years we will be in the top 100 and pushing into the top 90. As a university, in terms of schools and colleges, rather than telling you all the faculties we do have, it's easier for me to tell you what we don't have. We do not have a medical school. We have medical research, but we do not have a medical school, so we don't teach doctors. We don't teach agriculture, and we don't teach engineering. So these are the pieces we do not have. We have the arts, the sciences, the humanities, education, law, business, economy, all those other things. Also, to understand all of higher education, we must be aware of our financial model, because there's never enough resources to do everything we want to do. I know your university faces this challenge. We face this challenge. You always say, if we only had more money, we could do more things. If we only had more money, we could do things perhaps differently. And we'll talk more about that as we start to talk about what is innovation. But to put it simply, because my background is mathematics, I tend to think in terms of equations. Our financial model is we receive less than 1/4 of our budget from the government, from the state of Georgia. We receive over half of our budget actually from fees paid by the students themselves. So the students actually have to pay fees to attend our university. And it's not inexpensive. To attend Georgia State University for one academic year is almost $10,000 for a student. So it's inexpensive. And then there are research dollars. And when I get to the research piece, the important piece is the research funding in the United States is a purely competitive process. If faculty members want to do research, they must compete with faculty members from across the country and sometimes from beyond the U.S. For those research dollars. So it's very competitive. And then the last piece is what we call philanthropy. And these are the dollars that people literally give to us because they believe in what we're doing. And so for Georgia State today, that's about $40 million a year we get in new philanthropy. That's on a budget of over $1 billion. So our total budget in terms of our expenditures is over $1 billion annually. So philanthropy is a very small piece, but it's an important piece because we call that the margin for excellence. Those are the dollars that the state does not provide, the fees, the research dollars that allow us to do some things that are perhaps more innovative than we can do otherwise. Okay, so large university, large city, multiple campuses. The last piece that I skipped over, but I want to finish on, is this line C. We are a majority-minority university. The United States is a population of many peoples. We are considered the 10th most diverse university in the United States. And when I say majority-minority, what that means is there is no majority. In the Georgia State population, our largest student group, roughly 40% of our students are African American, people of African descent. About another third are Caucasian Americans or Americans of European descent. 15% would be Asian, and 10% would be Hispanic. What's fascinating about my university, and it's very unusual about the university, is it is also a university with a lot of students who are coming to the university for first time, so that their parents did not go to university. A lot of new students experiencing university as a first generation. And in fact, within our 53,000 students, actually even within the 53,000 at least, in a typical year, we will have over 4,000 students who are foreign-born Americans, meaning they were not born in the United States, but they are U.S. citizens by the time I get to our university. So a very large immigrant population. Most recent immigrant populations for our university, large immigration within our student body from Africa, but also from Asia, from Vietnam, from Korea, from China, and from India. So it's an incredibly diverse student body. And we like to talk about our university as looking like the future of our country, because this is the future of the United States, is to be incredibly diverse, people of many, many different backgrounds, races, ethnicities. Okay. So the question is, why is Georgia State considered an innovative university? The greatest accomplishment that we've had as a university, and the one that is most recognized, is this first bullet point. having to do with graduation rates at the same time as increasing access. So today, for the next academic year, we will probably have 5,000 new freshmen. 10 years ago, we would have only had 2,000. So as a university, we are taking more than double the number of students we used to take. So we have increased access, we have increased opportunity for our students. And usually in the United States, that means that we are basically saying that we will accept all students who are qualified to study at the university, rather than saying we will only take the top few, which is a decision we made in 2010. And it was at that time, it was a counterintuitive decision. Very few universities in the US would take this approach. The traditional approach in the US would be that you would only take the very highest scoring students, because they are the ones who will have the greatest chance of success. But instead, we said we would take all qualified students. But at the same time, we committed ourselves, and I'll tell the story in more detail, we committed ourselves that we would expect to graduate all the students we take. Okay? So that even though we were going to admit all qualified students, not just the most qualified, but all qualified students, we would expect them to graduate. And in so doing, what we have done as a university is we are the first university in America, and so far the only large university, to eliminate all disparities in graduation rates based on race, ethnicity, or income. So our students from the poorest families and our students from the wealthiest families graduate at the same rates. Our students from historically what we would say disadvantaged populations, from populations that historically have not graduated at high rates. Thank you. Now graduate at the same rates as our majority students, or our Caucasian students. This has never been done before. And the traditional approach, if you did want to accomplish this, would be the opposite of our increasing access. It would have been to take fewer students and to be more selective. So as a result of that success, and at the same time, we now are the national leader in graduating students from minority groups. We graduate more African American students than any university, any not-for-profit university in America. We're also in the top 50 for graduating Asian Americans and in the top 100 for graduating Hispanic Americans, which is quite remarkable given that of the top 100, about 90 of those schools are in just 3 states with large Hispanic populations, Texas, California, and Florida. So it's quite remarkable that we have this diversity and that we've basically been able to change the formula by which students will be successful. And that's what's led to our ranking for innovation, and I will tell the story of how we got there. Also for our commitment to undergraduate education. And this was really a commitment that we set from the beginning, which is if we admit a student to the university, we expect them to be successful. It is our belief that we've made the decision when we say you can come, that we have made that commitment, and we've been very successful. #1 ranked is Princeton University for undergraduate education. #1 ranked for innovation is Arizona State University. And then on the rank, again for research universities, as mentioned, we're number 108 in the last rankings, which is a 2-year-old data, because there's a lag in the process. We are one of the 5 fastest growing research universities for medical research from the National Institutes of Health. And then, as I said, we're moving from about 190 to 108. Okay, so these are the things we've been noticed for. But this is after 10 years of work. This is after 10 years of challenges and 10 years of difficulty and 10 years of basically trying to create something very different than what we once were. So the question is, in today's talk is, how did we get to this place? So I will start by telling it all began with a plan. And it began with a planning process. In February of 2010, we launched a strategic planning process that for me was counterintuitive. because as a university, we committed to a lengthy process to arrive at the goals for the university. And so the parameters that I, as the president, set were very simple. At the beginning in February 2010, the parameters were that we would limit our major goals to no more than 5. Because we needed to, if we were going to actually create a better university than we were, we had to be able to make sure, that everybody understood what the major goals were. And that to have more than 5 goals would basically lead us to trying to move in too many directions at one time. And then my second requirement was that we needed to be able to write this plan down on one piece of paper. Okay, the traditional U.S. university strategic plan is a book. It has maybe 20 goals, it has a lot of pretty pictures, a lot of very impressive academic language. It gets put in a book, everybody says this is a great plan, and then they put it on a shelf and they don't follow the plan. And so the change in direction that we took in 2010 was we had to be able to put it on one sheet of paper and have just 5 goals. So there'd be absolute clarity on what it is that we were going to work on, what would be our goals, and how are we going to literally change our university to be a better university. The second was the process. Was to form a very small committee of faculty and staff, and there's a student as well in there, a group of about 8 people, and they had responsibility starting in February 2010 to work in a broad participation, to work with the entire university to get consensus around these 5 goals. Now, that may sound like difficulty, but the reality is, you go to any university in the United States and ask them to write a strategic plan, I can guarantee you there's at least 4 goals that every university strategic plan will have. There will always be a goal about research. In this day and time, there will always be a goal about student success, making sure that students are successful. And that's partly due to the success of Georgia State. It didn't used to be that way, but today all the plans have this. There is these days a goal about education and about innovation in education, making sure that we become more successful at how we teach and how students learn. And then every university in the U.S. is going to have a goal around internationalization, around globalization, about the role of higher education, our universities, our students, and our faculty in a global society, in a globally competitive landscape. So we have a small committee that's going to work with the entire university community for a period of almost 1 year. That included online surveys, included lots of public forums, included lots of focus groups and discussion. There were white papers written by faculty groups to discuss different ideas. And it came down to the point where they had come down to 5 goals after working for about 8 months. But then we did something unusual, we would say unorthodox, not the way it's usually done in the US. Because usually in the US, when you do a strategic plan, it is an internal process of just the faculties and the staff and the students. But we decided that we would take our plan outside the university and get the reaction to the plan. And there's a reason for this. Let me go back to the resources. There's never enough money. And so we knew that with our strategic plan, not only would we use it to guide our work, we would also use it to ask people for money. Our plan would be what we would go to the government and say, we need funding from the government for these new initiatives, for these new innovative projects. We would go to donors, the philanthropists, and say, we are trying to do this work, we need your help, we need your support. So if we were going to go ask people for money, we wanted to make sure that we had a plan that actually resonated or had meaning to the external community. So in this late summer of 2010, they took what was close to the final draft of the report to a group of individuals, approximately 25 individuals, and asked them for their feedback. These individuals were leaders in our state, in our region. They included elected officials, government officials. They included influential alumni. They included community leaders and business leaders. And they were interviewed, all 25 of them. And in October of 2010, we received the results. And this is probably one of the most pivotal moments of the process, is we were told that they had good news for us and they had bad news. The good news is that all 25 individuals who had an opportunity to read that version of the plan agreed that it sounded impressive. The bad news was they didn't actually know what it said and they didn't know why they should care. Okay, so you have something that sounds very good, it sounds very impressive, but I don't actually know why it's important. And that was a difficult moment for the committee. It was a very difficult moment. And I remember very well sitting in the conference room, and one of our faculty, who's now is one of our vice presidents today, looked at me and he asked the question, does this mean we start over? And I said, no, that's not what they told us. My translation of what these external stakeholders told us is, we have written our plan in an academic language that is our language, but it is not their language. And so what we need to do is not start over, but we have to take our plan and translate it into a language that the larger world will understand, the world that the government will understand, that industry and companies will understand, that our alumni will understand. And that's what we did. The other part, I would say, this is a point that I shared with President Sun and his leadership this morning, is that we were very clear from the beginning of this process that even though it was the entire university was to participate, we needed people to understand that when we got to the plan, that things were going to change. We were not going to be the same university in the next year, in 2 years, in 3 years. Because to expect different results but not change is insanity. Albert Einstein is supposedly, a great physicist, supposedly said to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results is insanity. And that was the point that we had to drive home, is that we needed everybody to understand what this plan was. Again, only 5 goals. And to participate in those conversations, because this plan was going to lead changes in how we work as a university. It's going to lead to changes in what we do and how we do. And so this is the beginning. It was coming up with this process, was to have a great clarity that we were going to do a few things. They had to be important, and they were going to lead us to behave and work in different ways. And that we would do that in a language that could be understood in the broadest sense by the large community. So where did we go with that? Okay, so that has led us to what today we call the state way. So if you go on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn and you see anything from Georgia State in social media, it's usually tagged the state way if it's related to the work that we do. So the place I want to start, because today in this day and time where my university is considered one of the most innovative universities, and I've been written up as being considered one of the most innovative presidents, is actually quite interesting to me, because at no point in this journey did we ever say that we wanted to be innovative. And now today, I get invited to conferences, I get invited to universities to talk about innovation. We did not start by saying we wanted to be innovative. In fact, there's never been a day in my life when I woke up in the morning and said, I feel innovative today. Today's going to be an innovative day. Today we're going to do something. Instead, and this is my background in mathematics, we solve problems. I've been solving problems since I was a little boy doing mathematics problems. The mathematics problems are easy because they don't involve people. They don't involve change. They're in a static world. But in the world of being a university leader, the world of being, whether it's a dean or a department chair, a provost or a president, a rector, the problems are more complicated. So what is innovation? That's really the starting point that I ask, is what is innovation? Because as leaders in universities, we know, after much discussion and careful thought, what we want to accomplish. We have goals. We have goals for research. We have goals for education. The trick is we don't have solutions. And there's really 2 types of problems that we have to solve. One type of problem is there actually is a solution. Somebody has developed a solution, but it is too expensive or impractical. So there may be an existing solution, but we can't use it because we don't have the resources. We don't have the money to be able to use that solution. So we have to come up with a new one. Or it may be a problem where there is no solution, that nobody has solved this problem. So for example, I said earlier that Georgia State is known in the US as the first university to eliminate all disparities in graduation rates, so that basically all students of all races, ethnicities, and income levels graduate at the same rate. That had never been done before. People had tried to work on different parts of this problem from different levels. They had tried different solutions, and they had not met with success. So what is the state way to innovation? How is it that we have had success where others were unable to have success in the past? So let me start with some principles and some methodology. The first principle is one that I did not think of. I don't actually believe any member of my staff thought of it. It was actually through a partnership with other universities that we got introduced to what is called design thinking. Design thinking is, now you can find this on the internet. Stanford University has an institute or center around design thinking. And it's really the idea of problem solving from the point of view of understanding unmet customer demands. And this is a change of point of view for higher education. Because if you look at the way that higher education, at least in the US, I can't speak to Vietnam, I've not worked here, but at least in the US, in US higher education, the usual approach to organizing our university and designing our curriculum and our academic programs is from the point of view of the faculty. What do the faculty want to do? What do the faculty think should be done? And with design thinking led us to looking at this from a very different perspective. How do you look at what are the problems and the challenges from the student perspective? So this was literally changing your point of view, changing your observation point. So that was one of the important principles that we have adopted in this process, this journey that we've been on, is of design thinking, of problem solving from the point of understanding unmet customer demands, our customer needs. In other words, understanding the challenges the students face. What are their issues? What are the things that make it difficult for students to be successful from their perspective? The second principle is scalability. We have 53,000 students. Whatever we do, we have to be able to do for every student. And this is where the issue of being innovative comes in, because a lot of the solutions within the higher education space for problems we were trying to solve have historically been very expensive. They've required for us to hire a lot of people. In the US, people are very expensive. Talent is very expensive. Talent is difficult to find. We call it a war for talent. The best minds, the best talent, very difficult to compete for. So we had to find solutions that could be scalable. A solution that would work not just for one student, or 10 students, or 100 students, or 1,000 students, but solutions that would work for tens of thousands of students. So those are the two principles that we have come to be part of what we call the state way. And then the second is the methodology. This is the tactical work. This is the work of actually getting down to the details. One of the very first things we had to do was collect our data. This is what's important about this work that we have done, is we could not have done this 10 years ago or 20 years ago because the technology was not there. But in the beginning, as we started the work of the university of basically wanting to guarantee that students that we admit would graduate, that we would move our research, that we had to know the facts. We had to have the data. And that most American universities 10 years ago did not have all their data in one place. We call this a data warehouse. The colleges would have some data. The research office would have some data. But there was not one data source, this data warehouse. So we have something that we call the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. And they have brought together where we can bring all of our data sources together into a data warehouse. So if the president or the vice presidents or the deans or the department chairs have questions, we know where the data are, we know how to ask the questions. I'm trained as a statistician. There's a saying in the US, the truth will set you free. Well, the truth are in the data. The data do not have perspectives. They are what they are. And so we have the data. Second is we have done something that we teach in higher education, but at least in the US we tend not to do, which is to experiment in our own community, to experiment within the university. As I say, in the sciences, in biology, in chemistry, in physics, we always begin by teaching students the scientific method. You have a hypothesis. You design an experiment to test the hypothesis. You conduct the experiment. You get the results. The results either reject the hypothesis or are at least consistent with the hypothesis. The results can never prove the hypothesis. They can only fail to disprove it. And then you go back and you do more experiments as you learn more and more. That is what we teach in the sciences. That is not how we run our universities. The way we run our universities is we say we have a problem, at least in the US, the way we do it. We appoint a committee, we get a bunch of faculty together. They're all very smart people. They have PhDs, they're successful scholars. They sit around, they debate the ideas, and then they decide what the recommendation or what the solution is. Very rarely do we actually do experiments. Very rarely do we actually do experiments on our own policies and practices. And so what part of the state way is that Georgia State, we actually do a lot of experiments. We don't assume that because we are smart and because we have PhDs that we know the right answers. We assume we are smart. We assume that we have good ideas, but we test those ideas against reality by conducting experiments. So we do pilot studies, which would be small studies, but again, remember the principle of scalability. We only do pilot studies with with projects that could go to complete scale. So we may do a small experiment with 100 students or 500 students. Next fall, we're doing an experiment with 8,000 students. But the idea is if that experiment works, we will then take it to 53,000 students. That is an experiment that started a year ago with 2,000 students. So then we iterate, we evaluate, we scale. The last piece in our methodology, and I think, again, this is important about where we are at this point in time, is the answers are not technology and the answers are not people. The answers for most of our and I will give examples. Most of our examples are situations where we have allowed people to do their jobs differently by using technology in ways they've never been able to use it before. So as a university, we have been an early adopter of several technologies that are changing how higher education, at least in the US, works. And I really believe it'll be a global. And we'll get into those examples. But it's changing the jobs of the people because the technology allows them to do their job differently, perhaps better, and as you will see in many cases, at scale. In old solutions where it may have been one individual could work with 100 students, now one individual using the right technology can work with thousands of students. So let's take a look at this. So I can give 3 examples here of how the state way has come to be in different areas. So the first is predictive analytics. This is basically using our data to be able to, with a high degree of confidence, predict whether or not a student is going to graduate in their chosen major 4 years later. So this was once we had the data warehouse, using a new technology platform from a company. We were one of the first universities to try this. For every student in the university, within the first year, we can identify a single course based on that student's major, which tells us whether or not they have at least an 80% chance of successfully completing that course of study. So we can do this for nursing, we can do this for biology, we can do this for business, we can do this for psychology, we can do this for every major. And what it required was the data warehouse. We took 10 years of data every course that we offered, every student in the university for 10 years, looked at their grades, and basically went through for every major and identified one course in the first year, the grade they have to get to have at least an 80% chance of graduating. So for example, in nursing in the US, or in our university, it's not a specific course, it is whatever their first laboratory science is. We know that whatever the first course that a nursing student takes is laboratory science. It could be in biology, it could be in chemistry, it could be in anatomy and physiology. It doesn't matter, it's just the first laboratory science. And then we know the grade they have to get. And it's typically, in ours, we have a system of A's, which is excellent, B is good, C is average, D is poor, and F is failing. It has to be at least a B or a B plus or better, depending on the major. And we can go through this. In finance, it is microeconomics. The first course in economics that a student takes is predictive of whether or not they will complete in finance. And we can go through all the majors. So that was one of our first big successes and big projects, was to be able to go through using data so that at a very early stage, we can give students the best advice whether or not they have chosen the path that is good for them. And if the path they have chosen does not appear to be one where they're likely to be successful, then it sets us up to be able to have a conversation with them about what path they should be on. Because we now have all their grades, we have now over 10 years of data for other students, and we can say, okay, these look like places where you are most likely to be successful. So we can do a better job of fitting the students with the majors and the courses of study that they are choosing. So that's one example of how we harness technology. The second is what we call proactive advising. Okay, again, tens of thousands of students. We don't have the advisors to give a lot of individual advice on a regular basis to every student. It's just not possible. We don't have those resources. This is an example where the traditional solution is you have lots of people giving lots of, working with students in small groups, being able to give advice. But we don't have that luxury, and it's most large universities don't. So our proactive advising system is a system that tracks 800 variables on every student every day. Every night, in the middle of the night, the computer goes through and it updates any changes to the data from that day. Most of these variables don't change day to day. The kind of information in this data set can be academic information about the grades the student has gotten. It can also be financial information. Because remember, it is very expensive for a US student to go to our university. And the greatest risk for our students not completing their studies are not academic, they're financial. It's the financial challenges of being able to pay their fees and stay in school. So we track their financial information. We also have the professors can report that the student is not coming to class. And that is actually the greatest predictor of success. If the student doesn't come to class, they tend not to be successful. Simple concept, but it works that way. So this system of proactive advising is the technology every night is updating the data. And if there's any indication that the student is not, has made a decision or something has happened to indicate that they are getting off path, that they are veering away from being successful, that stimulates a human interaction. That stimulates a conversation between the student and the advisor. Some students never have to meet with their advisors. They basically can be self-directed and take care of themselves. Some students require a lot of help. This system is set up, so basically our number of advisors is typical of a US university, but we have literally tens of thousands of interactions between students and advisors every year. Again, in a technology supported system. The third example is one that pushes our research beyond our normal practices. This is the world of chatbots. Chatbots are robots that send text messages. In other words, it's automated text messaging. You may have experience with that, I don't know. Nudges are using text messages to send students information for things that they should think about or do in real time. And so this is an area where we started with a small project, a very focused project. And that was working only with students before they come to our university. Students will apply to the university, they will be admitted. In the summer before they start, they have a list of things they must accomplish, various financial records they have to take care of, academic things they need to take care of, lots of processes they must do. And if they are a poor student, it turns out to be more work than a student from a wealthy family. So the challenges are different for different students. What this system did is the nudges are just text messages to the students, because we know the process. This again is design thinking. We know what the student has to do. We can just map out their responsibility. They need to verify that they have their vaccinations against certain infectious diseases. They need to pay certain fees. They need to register for courses. We can map all that out. Then we can have the computer, the technology, look and see, okay, what they've done, what they haven't done. And for things they haven't done, they get a text message. It's a nudge. It's the word we use, nudge. So just a little push. The student then, because it's a text message, has the opportunity to ask questions about what they need to do or how they need to do it. And so they send a text message back asking, what office do I go to pay this fee? Or where do I find out the amount of money? Or where can I get these vaccinations? Whatever the nudge was. And what on the other end is a machine. It's a chatbot. We have a database of over 2,000 questions that are the frequently asked questions. And what the chatbot does is it takes the student's question, translates it into its computer language, checks it against the database, and it answers the student. Over 80% of the questions get answered by the machine in less than 8 seconds. The other questions go to a human being, and the human being has to answer those. So it's the use, again, of technology. There's no way that we could have people making all these phone calls or people sending all these emails. But using the technology, we can give the students the nudges, we can get their questions. The technology can answer most of the questions, and the people only have to intervene on the few that were not able to be answered by the chatbot. So that was the first experiment. That was a few years ago. And the beauty of this is the experiment became much larger than our university. There's actually a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, a graduate from Harvard University, who's actually conducted studies on Georgia State's use of the chatbots and can actually demonstrate with data the success that this works, that the students are able to get many more of their questions answered, to be able to be more timely and more successful. So these are all examples of the state way and how we look at the problem from the student's perspective, look at it from the perspective of being able to do it for everybody, find a technology that makes this feasible, because we could not just hire more and more people to do it, and then deploy it in small steps. And so the next experiment with chatbots is to do actually financial advising for the students. And that's an experiment that we're building a master database on. We ran that experiment again, I think about 2,000 or 4,000 students, and we're now going to do the next experiment on 8,000. But ideally, being able to eventually use this kind of technology to answer a large number of questions for all students, not just this very specific set of questions for new students. So it's a never-ending process for us. This journey for us has actually led us to also think in how have we changed how we organize the university. So again, in a university, we tend to be organized around the academic programs. So the typical position in an American university would be the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, a position we also call Provost, a position I once held. And that is the person who is responsible for all the academic programs, responsible for all the deans, the faculties, the colleges, the professors. What we've done in this journey as we've moved to design thinking and looking at issues from another perspective is we have created a parallel role which is new, is the Senior Vice President for Student Success. And so these two individuals are Senior Vice Presidents. In my university, there are only 3 Senior Vice Presidents. One is the Chief Financial Officer, the person who's responsible for all the resources and managing all the money. And then there are these other 2. And these other 2 Senior Vice Presidents are both academics, and they actually must work together. That's key to the success. But they approach their job from a different perspective. The Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs is responsible for the academic quality. So the academic quality is the quality of the faculty, the quality of the research, the quality of the academic programs. The Senior Vice President for Student Success looks at the university from the perspective of how does the student experience the university. And it looks at all aspects of how the student experiences the university. From the day they visit the university, apply to the university, enroll at the university, if they live in our university facilities and our housing, all of their interactions. Because the reality is, at least for our students, is that many of the difficulties that our students face are in that other part of life. It's not just academics, it's what I call life happens. There's something that happens with your family that makes it difficult for you to stay in school. It could be financial, it could be health, it could be any number of things. And so we have 2 individuals, both at the senior level, looking at the success of the university and the students, but one through the eyes of the faculty and the other through the eyes of the students. And where these 2 must work together hand in hand is when the student meets the curriculum, when the student meets the academic piece. So for example, the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs makes sure that we have the right courses of the highest quality, and the Senior Vice President for Student Success makes sure that we have enough courses, that the students can get the classes they need at the times they need them, that we're offering the course frequently enough at times a day, etc. So there's a logistics issue. So they come together around these sorts of issues. Okay. So let me then go to some of the areas of education, innovation, some things that we've done in that space, and then I'll finish up with research and take questions. Okay, in the education space, one piece that we use, and this is something that's been present in American universities for more than 20 years. They're called freshman learning communities. The idea is that, again, we have very diverse students. We have students from rural areas, we have students from the middle of cities, we have students who are from very poor families, we have students from very wealthy families, we have students from very different cultural backgrounds, African American, Caucasian, Asian, Hispanic, mixed race, variety of different backgrounds. One of the things we try to do to help students be successful is to make that transition from where they grew up in that world that they knew, where their family was, whether it was rural, urban, whether it was different cultures, different traditions, that when they come together is to give them a sense of community. And so we have something called freshman learning communities, where the students come together and they basically take all their classes the first year with the same students. So they actually get to know other students. These may be people they've never met before, so that they actually can have some sense of community, some sense of friends, people they can study with, people they can discuss their classes with. And that's been a concept that's been around in the US for a long time. The 2 changes that Georgia State's made, actually 3 changes that we've made in this area, is at many universities that has been an elective. A student could choose to be in one of these communities. But it turns out that this model is so successful. The students who have chosen to take all their courses with the same students for 1 year tend to do better academically than the students who don't. So we now actually require all the students to be in a freshman learning community. That is an expectation of every student. Again, an example of going to scale, that we can actually do this for all students. The second thing is we now organize these freshman learning communities around what we call meta majors. In a traditional model, a student would pick and say, I want to be a mathematics major, or I want to be a finance major, or I want to be a nursing major. We don't actually ask them to be that specific in the freshman year. The idea of meta majors is we're going to collect students around a general theme of interest. So for example, our meta majors, one area is health. So the students in this freshman learning community for health, they could want to be nurses, they could want to be doctors, they could want to be physical therapists, physiotherapists. It's just that they're interested in health. Same thing in business. We don't ask them whether they want to be in accounting or marketing or finance, computer information systems, whatever. Just that they're interested in business. Another meta major is education. We don't ask them to be very specific about that. And in that first year, we use that meta major, that freshman learning community, then to expose the students to all the different opportunities within that area, within the area of education, within the areas of business. Because the reality is many of these students come to us, they don't actually know what an accountant does. They don't actually know what a financial analyst does. They don't actually know what somebody in marketing does. And so it's in that first year that we can actually give them that breadth of experience and help them more clearly identify where they fit in the larger career goals. And then the third piece is college to career. This is a new initiative for us. It's something that we're just starting right now. But we do it within the freshman learning communities. Is as freshmen, we begin the conversation with the students about what it is they're going to need to accomplish over the next 4 years to be successful when they go out as graduates. So we start working with them on what it is they're learning and how that's going to be relevant when they leave. How it's going to be relevant when they go for an interview with a job, whether it's with a company or the government, or go to university for graduate school. And so to create a process that's going to take them through their education, again, in the traditional way, you enroll the students, they go to class, they get their grades, they get their major, and then as they get close to graduation, they start thinking about what job do I apply for, what career do I want to have. And what we've come to learn is that's too late in the process. So we now start this college to career transition in the freshman year. And it's to have very substantive conversations around things that the student may not realize that are relevant to the career. So think about an English major or a history major and have the conversation with the student about the things you are learning in these humanities, how those are going to be skills that are not only of interest for studying history, or studying literature, but are also of interest for companies that employ people. What are these skills that can be translated into careers so that when you go for a job interview, that you can actually explain to your future employer why they should hire you, what is your competitive position, what is your advantage. So that's one example of things that we have changed in how we structure our educational programs. Again, looking at the student journey all the way through. Second, mathematics interactive learning environment. This is what we call the mile. The mile is a laboratory. And basically for all of our first level introductory mathematics courses, including statistics, we no longer use the traditional method of teaching mathematics, the method that I learned, which was going to a lecture hall and listening to the professor lecture. Instead, the students actually only go meet with the professor one day of the week. The other days, they go to the mile, the mathematics interactive learning environment, and they sit at a computer and they're using a software that actually presents them with material. It teaches them their mathematics subjects, so they have to read, but then it gives them problems and they have to solve them. And they're solving them on the computer. And the software on the computer is smart enough that if the student does not give the right solution, the computer actually knows what the mistake the student made, and it can identify what they didn't understand. And the software can then take them and teach them what they didn't understand so they can master that body of knowledge and then come back to the lesson and continue. There are teachers in the room that if the student gets stuck on the computer, they can put up their hand, they can have someone come help them. But it turns out what we call this more immersive learning environment, that instead of listening to the professor, the student is actually doing and having to work through by themselves, they actually learn mathematics faster and better than in the traditional method. So this is something that, again, we started with small projects that we've now scaled to all of our interactive and introductory mathematics. Flipped classrooms and experiential learning is then, again, a variation on that. Fewer lectures, more time with the students out actually taking the course material and actually going out and experiencing the course material. So actually doing research and doing the work on their own, and only meeting with the professor once a week instead of the traditional 2 or 3 times a week to talk about what it is the students have done and how they've learned by doing them themselves. So we call this flipped classroom because the students are generally, the professor is, instead of being the lecturer or the teacher, is more the guide as the student goes out and learns by experience. And this is an area that continues to grow for us and continue to look for new ways. And I should say, and Dean Berman reminded me of this morning, the professors are not alone in this. We actually have an entire office and team called our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning that works with faculty to teach them how to do this. We don't assume that professors will just wake up and say, I'm going to flip my classroom and teach differently today. That's not how it happens. We actually, again, have a methodology, we have processes, we have examples, and we have staff that work with the faculty on how to change their teaching so that basically the students become much more personally involved with the material than just to be a student sitting in a lecture hall. And then the last example I'll talk about from education is the other piece is as the world changes, we don't assume that the majors that we have are the majors the students will need in the future. That there may be new areas of study we need to create because there are new opportunities for students. And for us, this is very important to do this within the context of the physical place that our university is. So again, I go back, Atlanta is a city of business. One of our largest colleges is our business school. Well, most of our students want jobs when they graduate. I would say 98, 99% of the students want a job. And so what we start looking at is what are the job opportunities within our region? And so within the Atlanta area, what are the large industries, the big companies, the types of companies that are hiring, and what talents do they need that we may not have? So we may have said in the past, well, you may want to hire a computer science graduate, you may want to hire a business graduate, you may want to hire English graduates, whatever. We now look to where we have large concentrations of industry. Can we actually have curriculum that are very specific to those opportunities? So the first one that we did, and again, we do all this in an experimental basis. We don't just make up degrees and start new degrees. We start with pilot programs and experiment. The first one was health informatics. So this is the entire, in the US healthcare system, the health records, the health information, how do you collect that information, how do you organize it, how do you analyze it, how do you run your business. We created a health informatics major. And this required different faculties to come together. This required our business school and our health faculty and our nursing faculty to design a new curriculum that would teach students about analytics, about data, about business, but also about healthcare. So this was one of the first pilots that we did, and that is now scaled. Public health, traditionally in the US, has been a graduate major. We now do that as an undergraduate. Game design, computer games, huge industry. Globally, probably rivals in terms of online viewer participation, all the other sports watching in the world, particularly from Asia. Massive numbers, just tens of millions of participants in this world of computer games and online computer gaming. Somebody has to design these games. It turns out it's a tremendous area of interest for our students because there are companies in the Atlanta area that actually produce new computer games. They design them, they sell them, they're in the marketplace. Game design and media entrepreneurship, which is the whole world of who wants to create the next Instagram, the next Facebook, the next Twitter, whatever the Weibo, WeChat, whatever it's going to be, WhatsApp. Media entrepreneurship. So game design and media entrepreneurship for us, we've only had these majors for 2 years, and it's still in the experimental phase. But in less than 2 years, we have over 600 students split between game design and media entrepreneurship. And then the last one is legal analytics, which is the entire practice of the law. And law is very unique to every country. We all have our own legal systems and our own systems of law. But in the U.S., again, this is an industry that has been very human capital intensive. Large numbers of people doing lots of work, scanning documents, reviewing materials, doing lots of rigorous study. With new technologies, with the ability for technology to read words and actually translate that into actionable data sets, the field of legal analytics is coming into play. And it's going to literally change the opportunities in the legal profession. And so we're one of the leading universities in this space. And this is, again, our law faculty and our business faculty coming together to work around this space. I will say with that, one of the points I want to make is we all know that technology is changing very rapidly. And it's very clear that technology has eliminated a lot of jobs in areas like manufacturing and industrial production. There have been industries that have been what we would call low-wage industries that have literally moved around the world. One of the great examples, if you go back and study the history of industry, is the textile industry, the making of clothes and cloth. In the US, that industry used to be situated in one part of the country in the Northeast. It then moved to the Southeast, not far from where our university is. It then left the United States and it went to China. It then left China and came to Vietnam. And now much of it has left Vietnam and has gone to Bangladesh and other countries. But that is generally where in that process is the companies kept moving to factories when they could find people that would do the work for less money. But the next step is then to find the machines that would do the work for essentially no money, that let machines do the work instead of people. And what we've learned through the study of history and through the study of technology and technology transfer is anything that can be done as routine, that the process is the same day in and day out, that technology will eventually find a solution to replace the people. And so we've seen this in manufacturing, we've seen it in the production of automobiles now done by robots instead of people. We've seen this coming into the textile industry. But we now see it coming into medicine. We see it coming into the law. And so that's what's so important about innovation and change, is that everything that we do, we cannot assume that we as people will always be doing it the way we've done it. There will be technological innovations. So we see that in our curriculum as well. Lastly, research. The piece I would say here, the way that the university has been able to move so rapidly in this area is we've had, over the period of 10 years, two very focused initiatives. One we call our Second Century Initiative. Our university in 2013 celebrated its 100th anniversary. So it was to basically launch the university into our second century. And then at the end of that was the Next Generation Initiative. Both of these have been similar processes to make us more successful and more competitive in research. And so the first point is that it is a competitive process. We actually have the faculty compete for resources. We do not have enough money to give everybody the resources for everything they want to do. It's just not possible. So we use what we call a proposal process. The provost, senior vice president for academic affairs, issues a call and says, we're looking for the best ideas for research. But these are not for individual faculty, they are for teams. Because that's the other piece that we see, is that the problems that are left to be done in research, very few of them are left that can be solved by one person. The easy things that can be done by one person have pretty much been done. What's left to be done today requires teams of scholars, and teams of scholars with different backgrounds and different skill sets and experiences. So we put out a call for a competition for ideas that will bring together different faculties around a theme, an area, and I'll give some examples of this in a second, to be able to go forward. And the faculty compete, and then through the competitive process, proposal review, a lot of discussion review, then every year we fund some small number of new projects. For our university, typically 3 to 5 new projects. And these projects are not only funding for the faculty we have, but it's new faculty. We're going to go hire additional faculty because we need people to be successful in the project. So that's what we call cluster hiring. In cluster hiring, the idea is we're going to not hire people one at a time, but hire a group of people that when they come together, create a team that can solve problems in ways that no individual could solve it. And then the niche opportunities, meaning we're looking for places where our university has the opportunity to bring together a team that is going to be competitive on the national and international level. The idea is not that we want to be the number 200 program in something, but we're trying to find the new areas of scholarship, the new research questions, where we have the talent, if we hire the right people, to basically be one of the most competitive groups in the world. And then so that the hiring program has incentives to grow the program. So we say that we will give you 2 faculty positions or 3 faculty positions to combine with the group we already have. But if they are successful and you prove that, again, the idea of iterating, if you have success, that we can actually hire more people. So there's a path to continue to grow the program to a larger level. And so an example of this would be a hire that we did about 6 or 7 years ago, started with one faculty member who works in the area of infectious disease, inflammation, and the immune system. So we call this the 3 I's: the immune system, inflammation, and infectious disease. And we recruited this individual and we said, we want you to come create a team around this area at our university. We brought him from another university. We said, we'll give you the resources to build this group. And then if you prove success, for us success was very simple. It's measured in research grants and research dollars, that they were able to compete at the highest level in the US, that they would be able to hire more people. And in the end, that group now has grown from that one faculty member to an entire institute, a large group of people. We're actually building another building just for the infectious disease research area. And that group alone brings in more than $20 million US every year to fund that research program. And on top of that, then that group has created new academic programs that we call biomedical enterprise, which is training scientists to actually work in the biomedical industry for creating new therapies, pharmaceutical, biotechnology products, gene therapy, these sorts of things. So the whole idea is to use a competitive process with incentives that success will bring more success. And so that this process has allowed us to more than double our research portfolio in a period of about 6 years. So I'm going to stop there. I've talked a lot, given a lot of different examples. I hope there are some questions. Thank you very much.